So, Martin, thank you for joining me.
No, thanks for having me back.
AJ, this is your second time returning, and this is your second time returning, Martin. I believe.
Both experienced now with podcasting, aren't we?
We are indeed.
It's great to be here in person as well. The last time was remote.
The last one was remote, and it was actually in a WeWork outside of the office before we moved into this one. The lights kept going out. The aircon was absolutely crazy, and I had hair.
Yeah,
which is always fun.
I didn't have to suffer with the aircon. I was remote, so I was warm at home.
We were all remote. Yeah,
it feels like an age ago.
It actually was. I think I looked, and the first podcast we released of season 1 was May last year. So we are almost on a full cycle loop before we're doing this one.
It's been great. I've seen some great episodes since, though, right? So,
cool. Well,
upwards and onwards.
Cool. So, Martin, just from your perspective, can you just go over a little bit about your role and your responsibilities at DebtStream at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm one of the co-founders at DebtStream. I look after the product area of the business as well as marketing and all those good things, because product and marketing, I think, fits really nicely together, especially if you're a product-led business like ourselves.
Yeah. Speaking my language. You're speaking my language.
So from myself, it's, as you can imagine, all the way through from continuing to enhance our platform, our products and features for our different client bases across collections and recoveries, as well as then how we're going to market and support our different team members to show our clients like what it can mean for their business and how it can support them. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of quite a full cycle, really.
Sounds like you've got a lot of hats.
Many hats, as I'm sure anyone in the startup band knows.
That's very true. Now, although you have introduced yourself before, AJ, just a quick one.
Great. AJ, Senior Partner Manager here at Acquired, so I have the pleasure of looking after the partnership between DebtStream and Acquired. But historically, I tend to look after a lot of other lending platforms, as well as debt collection platforms in the sector. So I'm well versed, I think, in the payments ecosystem, particularly for these two verticals.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I want to set the scene for this podcast, really, and kind of go over to you, Martin, which is discussing some challenges within kind of the debt sector and where that started. And I'd like you to start with the reasons why DebtStream was founded, and equally just kind of take me through some of the challenges that the sector has seen over the last X amount of years since since the founding.
Well, there's a few stories to tell there, considering the pandemic has happened in between and everything else. Mm-hmm. So I guess the reasons behind starting your first part of the question, why we started DebtStream. Background on myself and my two other co-founders, we originally were in the debt purchase industry where we first met each other, a business called Arrow Global, their CapQuest brand, and we built out their digital platform in the first place. The reasons why we pushed that business to build out a digital engagement platform for customers that are being managed in collections and recoveries in that space is because we'd seen the likes of Monzos and Starling Banks and everyone else in this world from the front end, from acquiring customers, lead with digital first approaches. And we're then starting to see customers come through, they're acquired digitally and then just completely dropped off, which didn't make any sense. When something's gone wrong in someone's life and they need that extra support, you're kind of forcing them down traditional routes which add lots of pressure and anxiety of call centres, letters and everything else. So we kind of, to be able to give customers more choice, we thought there's a better way. We're extremely lucky with the opportunity to build it out with a business like Arrow Global and CapQuest to really see what that impact, what it could have on customers in regards to their engagement, driving better outcomes. But what we realised is actually to really accelerate in this space and enable different businesses in the collections and recovery sector, we needed to build our own software as a service platform. And that's how DebtStream was then born. Mm-hmm. Launched the market in March 2020 in the midst of a pandemic as well, 2 weeks later in lockdown, after we'd all left our full-time roles. Mm-hmm. So it's good, really good timing.
It sounds it. Yeah, it sounds like, well, I mean, from what we've seen, you've really taken a digital approach to marketing as well. I mean, what was the decision behind that and where did that start?
To be honest, it's kind of, for us, it's a bit of an ethos, right? Because we're pushing digital products, engaging through a digital first approach, based on our clients and how we engage with consumers and customers of our clients for our platform. So every other area where possible, we're trying to live and breathe that same ethos, including marketing as well. And I think a business like us and our stage and size as well can give incredible outreach as well that you're
100%.
not necessarily going to get until you're a large business through other traditional options.
So over to you, AJ, the kind of piece of why we kind of partnered with DebtStream and what's come of that so far. You know, take me through the journey of the reasons why we partnered and yeah, just take me through that journey.
Yeah, great. So I think primarily for us, there's a lot of synergies between the two businesses themselves, particularly in terms of innovation. Bringing the first, historically, the debt collection sector and recoveries has been probably a relatively underserviced sector, not just from a payments perspective, but certainly from a software perspective as well. So having a partner that really aligns with our ethos and the technical innovations that we're trying to bring to market and trying to show customers first and foremost that, you know, there are better products out there, there's better ways that you can be servicing your customers. That's where we see a lot of synergies between the two brands.
So when we talk about were you going to say something then? Sorry.
No, I was going to say, to be honest, I was just going to double down on what AJ was saying. I couldn't agree more. All I say, it's been an absolute pleasure, especially for me from a product perspective, right? Working with a company like Acquired. I totally agree that I think our ethos in regards to innovation and approach across the payments experience through to other experiences for customers, we really do take it as an approach of look through the customer lens, put the customer at heart of everything that you do, and then build out products and services around it as well. And I think that's why we're having good traction together in the collections and recovery space, because we're really enabling that change on the payments scene.
So when we look at the digital economy, what are you doing different at DebtStream that might not be done or may be seen as slightly unconventional within the debt space?
One of the big things that we've worked extremely hard on as well, because we saw the process ourselves, for instance, of building out digital platforms within an organisation. So my co-founder went off to build out the digital platforms across Hoist Finance, across UK and Europe as well. So we had another large financial services company to experience building it in this space. One of the things we heavily focused on was enabling not just the customers for self-service, but our end clients. So how do we build a highly configurable digital platform driven by data that based on different segments of customers and everything, you can configure totally different journeys, different options. It can all be done by an operational user. You don't need to have an understanding of code or anything like that. You just need to understand what's the customer journey, what you're trying to achieve, how can you support them. And I think that's something where we've really stood out, is that huge focus on making it as easy as possible for our clients, not just the end customers, to self-serve.
And have you found that COVID has pushed that, or do you think we were already on that trajectory anyway?
I think we were already on that trajectory, but to be honest, there's been a lot of information around COVID generally in regards to digital adoption, and I think that encompasses self-serve from the administration side on platforms like ourselves, right? So I think a 5 to 7 year acceleration in regards to digital adoption as well. If I actually shift that back and why I think COVID has helped on that side in regards to our clients and using our platforms and how they can drive self-service, I would have never thought I'd have my 80-year-old nan managing all her digital banking, right, completely on her iPad, which even my mum isn't her daughter, right? So she wouldn't have done that unless COVID had happened. Because she realised she could save £30 a week on taxis. I set up all the digital banking on her iPad. Great, £120 a month saved, plus it's far better, she can keep in regular touch. And now she's fully converted on a digital approach, right? In her 80s.
That's pretty good. Anything similar to that? Like what, as from a respect of like elder, you know, people in your family adopting the digital banking environment? Did you have to set up any digital bank accounts?
I think it's a little bit different from my perspective, you know, historically. Well, you know, I think when I look in different markets, you know, the UK tends to take a little bit more of a digital approach, certainly than a New Zealand perspective. I think New Zealand's probably, I'd say, 5 years behind the UK in terms of a digital perspective. So, I probably need to give my grandma a call maybe and find out if she's adopting anything from a digital standpoint.
Well,
Yes.
I love stuff like that though, right? Because we're seeing the same in the Canadian market, probably 5 to 7 years behind.
Yeah.
Everything, but so one of my co-founders, when he was rolling out for Hoist Finance across Poland, they actually took huge steps actually forward. For instance, they didn't go through the same process like we did in the UK because the technology had accelerated. There was learnings from other countries. They were able to go a few steps ahead as their starting point, rather than having to go through that whole journey that we've had to be through as well. So like countries like New Zealand and Canada and everything else, I think they've got an advantage that we've started going through that process. We know how customers that are behind on bills engage through digital experiences, so they can learn from everything we're doing together. And who knows, there might be some more opportunities for us.
Potentially there is. Look, I want to double click into the self-service kind of element that was just referenced. So I want to bring that to life for someone that might be listening to this in the car. What does that look like from a perspective of, as a digital journey for a customer? What does that look like? Can you take me through the steps? And then we're going to break that down in regards to a payments experience.
Yeah, and build that from a end consumer and also our client side.
Yeah,
as
that'd
well.
be great. Yeah.
So if I started on the client side on our platform, because that's the starting point, for instance, on a consumer journey they're going to drive, it could be right the way through from the start of just through drag drop templates, building email templates, or we've got our like secure messaging digital letters and micro journey templates that we deliver outbound. So the outbound engagement communications through no code, low code, or drag drop options, they can go through and build those different templates for different segments of customers. Then based on our integration to their CRM, they can use all the different data points they have available to decide what journeys, content and everything are going to be available on the self-service platform for the customer. So then the communications hit, the customer will authenticate themselves. They could be then dropped on, depending on the profile of the customer, they could be then dropped on to an option where they've missed one payment towards their mortgage, for example, and we drive a particular message, very personalised to themselves, and say, look, pay that today, or pay later today, or do you need some extra support? So with what we're doing together, right, they could go through a few clicks, Apple Pay, process the payment today, really seamless experience to the customer. They could go through, process an Apple Pay for a token payment, for instance, for the promise to pay for future, or a CPA payment, as everyone in the collections and recoveries industry will know that method. So it can be really seamless for a customer on that side, or it could then open up to other options for them where they could go through structure affordability if they continue to fall further behind. We connect to open banking, automatically categorise the data for the customer, understand their position. We understand if we could gain any additional benefits for them, so income maximisation. Then once again, at the end, payment plan, offer them options, could be a recurring payment through Apple Pay again, right? That we create a token. So even at every touch point for the customer, trying to make it as frictionless as possible, but guide them down the right path to make sure it's the right outcome.
And from a payments perspective, how important is the kind of offering multiple ways to pay in that journey? How important is that?
I mean, historically, if I look back at, the last 5-10 years, particularly for this sector, there's been a lot of innovation and changes in the world of payments, but I certainly think from a collections and recoveries perspective, it's probably lagged a little bit further behind. I think that there's definitely a educational piece that can take place around exactly like you said, that Apple Pay reoccurring, Google Pay reoccurring is available in this market, and it can be used because I mean, let's face it, we live in a digital world where we're always on our phone. Typically, I can't remember the last time I bought something on a laptop or something along those lines. I'm purchasing or paying for things through my phone, so Apple Pay and Google Pay is incredibly important.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, right? And we were having a conversation earlier as well as we met, is like between 80 and 90% of our traffic for our platform is through mobile, right? So you can think of a customer, really emotive situation, right? They finally get onto the right point to make a payment, and then traditional card payments, I think, like from work we've been doing together, right, is 80% acceptance rate versus 95% on Apple Pay. So improving that experience of that customer and actually making sure they can go through and they can pay. At the time, they're wanting to go through and resolve their outstanding arrears, right? Which is quite a big moment for a customer as well. So it just makes sure it's important to have mobile first experiences, take them through seamless payment experiences, and then they can be on their way and they're done. Right?
I think you're right, and certainly not just from a customer's perspective, but certainly from a business's perspective. I mean, you mentioned 15% increase on authorization or acceptance rates on card versus Apple Pay. Think about that for a business, just improving your collections by 5%, let alone 15, makes a huge impact.
Yeah, and it's I guess that's the big thing, right? You said lack of innovation in this sector and everything else. And it links into a previous conversation we've had before, right? You look up front, and that I'll talk of the Monzos that I said in the story of this world earlier. Everything's concentrated on upfront acquisition. How do you make that experience as good as possible? E-commerce, for instance, services and everything. There's e-commerce platforms, create digital experiences, and all these things. Once again, in like debt collection agency market, for lenders, utilities, when it does fall into the collections and recovery space, there hasn't been huge investment in the last decade, right, in regards to their own version of those digital platforms, those e-commerce platforms. They either have to go custom build, for instance, in-house themselves, incredibly expensive process. I know it can be into the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in regards, depending on the size of the organisation. Huge investment, and then you've got to maintain that technology and that stack, right? So it's an ongoing piece. Build a digital team around it. Huge piece. So for us, this is why, once again, it's kind of how do we design out of the box experiences like what we're doing with yourselves, our platform, say any debt collection agency, utilities business, get up and running. We're enabling them to have that innovation moment in regards to their operation.
Why do you think that this specific sector is slightly behind? When you say talk about those custom build, they invest a heavily amount into this platform. I don't want it to be the mindset of it isn't broke, don't fix it, but is it an element of that a little bit?
Well, I'll be honest, it's a little bit is people stuck in their way and everything else on that side. People fearful of change, for instance, like actually what does it mean from their operation, lack of understanding of actually we're giving away value. But also I think because once again other sectors have had providers like ourselves, like Acquired and DebtStream, really invest to support those sectors in regards to the digital space. They've not had that inflection moment where they're really supported, they can be enabled very easily. It's just a huge piece for them to go under that untaking until providers like ourselves have come around. And I think part of that investment has lacked because, once again, it's an unsexy business, right? The Steve Bartlett type phrase of unsexy business, right? And all that side, it really is. It's not a sector people look at and go like, great, I want to build a business in the software business in the debt recovery sector, for instance. And that's where we think actually you can completely flip on its head. It really is, because it's an attractive moment. Customers that are at their kind of most vulnerable positions that we can really support with great digital experiences.
I think that the digital journey has got so slick and so seamless in other sectors. The modern consumer now just expects it when they're paying for anything.
Exactly.
And I think that's the thing that
Totally
we
agree.
were talking about at the Civia conference in the week, which was it's all well and good these digital platforms providing payment or providing links to a customer. You owe X, Y, Z. You provide the link, it lands on my phone, but I press the link and it takes me to your website. I still need to log into my platform, put my email address in, my password, then see how much I owe. Do I do payment plan? Do I pay via this? And even when I do decide I have to put my card details in, I'm now 25, 30 clicks along the line and I'm still no closer to really paying off any debt. So it's a case of how do we make that customer journey as seamless as possible? And you talk about it in regards to your digital journeys, which is making it as seamless as possible. So how does that come close? And from your perspective, has Consumer Duty had a part to play in that, which is giving a customer a better outcome? How close has your platform been involved with conversations around that?
What I'll be honest, what I loved about Consumer Duty on that side is actually when we looked at it is we felt our platform was there fit for purpose because we'd built the flexibility and it was data driven to drive different outcomes to customers. It was kind of fit for purpose, and it actually just enabled us to hugely validate actually everything we've been building was right for this regulated sector. And what it's done is opened up the eyes of other businesses to really look at platforms like ourselves. They hadn't really thought about it before, but how we can enable that flexibility for themselves to drive the right outcomes, for instance, whether it be an outcome on paying their account off right there and then, for instance, through to putting their account on hold and giving them breathing space or whatever it be, is that they actually can achieve it through a platform like ourselves. So the Consumer Duty, I'd say, had a direct impact in regards to pushing acceleration of innovation in the industry and acceptance of solutions like ours together. And I think, to be honest, now we're ready together to support the sector and continue to support the sector as regulatory changes happen.
Do you feel like vulnerability comes up quite a lot in conversations with customers?
Yes.
And how do you feel like that is tackled with your platform? I'll be interested to know, because again, it's something that we hear a lot, something we spoke about in a few different podcasts of season 2, and I'm curious to get other people's perspective on how they're using certain tools like AISP side of open banking to identify vulnerability before then taking a payment.
Well, there's a few different aspects actually for our platform as well. So it could be, as a starting point, they had already been through a call centre or an account of a customer that was onboarded with a debt collection agency that's using our platform, for instance. They previously spoke to their lender or whoever it be that's placed the account, and there were signs, for instance, of a vulnerability. And that could be like anxiety, mental health, it could be other physical or other vulnerabilities, right? Our platform, for instance, at a starting point can use that data so we can personalise the journey for the customer. Previously seen that they were suffering with mental health. So we know actually we're going to put supportive content that's available for them that can push them to organisations like Mind Debt Charity, right? And it's subtle personalisation, like we put them at the top amongst other support. So we're not, because no customer considers themselves as the label vulnerable. It's a personal life circumstance that they've been through as well. So it is subtle personalisation. We're not saying, oh, we know you've previously notified that you're suffering with anxiety and mental health. We're just putting that at the top, right? So it's there, it's ready to support them. And so that's the lighter moments as well on that side. Then through to, we go for an affordability assessment, for instance. We connect to open banking through other partners and integrations, for instance. Have a partner that's available as part of that actually does, based on the data from the open banking side, will do scoring and understand either their financial vulnerability as well as based on like demographic information, everything like potential, based on areas like other potential vulnerabilities, like in regards to like work and everything else, for instance, on those different demographic sides. So we can go through that and capture this customer might potentially have financial vulnerability as well. We're looking to do a lot of work with step change, for example, then, and we can like look to do digital handoffs, for instance, through to organisations like Step Change as well at those points in time that we've recognised they might need some extra support as well, to look at a holistic approach for that customer with all the different debts that they have, as well with different creditors outside our clients using our platform. As well as then another example as well, and this is once again where I can go down too many rabbit holes because we've built a lot of flexibility in the platform, but also within those early stages of a journey as well, we can build dynamic questions and prompts to say, is there a reason that you miss your payment? Based on that answer, okay, actually, what exactly is it? Is it one of these elements? And then we can drill down to actually, is there a specific vulnerability that's going on here? We can identify in the digital journey, capture the consent with the customer. It means we can then pass it back to the system of our client as well, so it can be, the awareness of that can then be managed on an ongoing basis.
We've talked a lot about technology and how businesses should be using technology to leverage better customer outcomes, etc., etc., etc. But at what point, or do you ever see a point in which that we might get to that we have lost the human touch in certain elements of debt collection? I asked this specific question to Sarah Naylor on an enforcement podcast not too long ago, and it was a case of how do you balance the technology question versus we do need to show empathy and we do need to show some form of human touch?
So one of the biggest things is making sure channels are connected, right? If a customer does want, and I think we do that really well in our platform. If a customer wants to be handoff to speak to an agent through web chat or messaging different channels or over the phone, right? We do seamless handoffs and integrations. On the other side, though, because of personalization, for instance, and that's what we're trying to take through as an approach. It is more of a conversational digital journey. For instance, you're taking that customer through a supported journey. And I think you've just got to push the choice onto the customer, right? And I completely understand taking that human side out of the equation, but that might be the perfect fit in for that customer at that point in time. Give them the choice. Because I've seen in real examples, right, and on a couple of fold, of someone who's full of huge anxiety and embarrassment of speaking through someone over the phone, right? So actually, that is the personal touch, the human touch, giving them that digital channel to go through that process, enable them to do it in their own time, when it suits them, take the anxiety out of that process, right? So that's completely the right thing for that customer, as well as other customers I've seen, like they're full-time carers. They also then work full time. It's not until past 9 o'clock at night they have an opportunity to solve something like this. So actually providing personalised digital journeys or other self-service options, for instance, through IVRs and there's lots of different options and approaches. I think once again is a very humane approach, right? Because you're thinking about that person and their situation. You might not be able to service them through the voice channels and conversational channels. But choice is the biggest thing.
I mean, you raise a really good point, right? I mean, we were talking to a collection agency the other day, both DebtStream and ourselves, that specifically mentioned they have an agent assist and an IVR product because typically some customers don't want to talk to someone.
Yeah.
You know, when they want to make a payment, they are riddled with anxiety or whatever it may be.
Exactly.
Well, they might be slightly embarrassed that they need to make a payment. They actually don't want to talk to anyone. They just want to make the payment and end the journey.
And I think you mentioned something in the pre-build-up, which is about margins being squeezed, taking a bit of an angle because I'm conscious of time, about margins being squeezed from a DCA perspective and payment fees rising, all this kind of stuff. So can you elaborate a little bit on that? And then I'm going to come over to AJ from the payments fees perspective.
Well, to be honest, any company hasn't really had a good time, have they, over the last few years on costs and everything else, right? So debt collection agencies, for instance, have really focused down on themselves as a traditional model, focus on a contingency-based model. If they don't collect, they don't get any revenue, and then they can't actually support the clients of the creditors themselves, right, the lenders and utilities businesses, who do actually rely heavily on debt collection agencies. Not in this traditional approach, right? Debt collection agency is probably the wrong term. Like you see great companies like digital DRA and everything else, like digital resolution, right? But within that as well, like to be able to really support customers, they need to ensure they can still offer the different services. Post has gone up hugely and it continues to go up in costs. It's crazy how much it costs to send a letter, and then they're paying for other technology like their core systems and dialing technology and everything else, right? So payments is no exception. So everything we've done together, and we've had some great conversations recently, AJ, with some different companies that we've been helping as well along that path and that journey. It's been to find different ways like payment processing costs to really reduce that for them. And that's offering multiple different methods. So with the acquired hosted checkout that we have in place, you could offer Apple Pay, Google Pay, for instance, that increase the payment rates like we said earlier. So that's one benefit, right? Get more payments in, offset some of your cost. Or on the other side, right, we can pull through open banking for yourselves, which is far lower payment processing cost. And to be honest, I think acquired are one of the best in regards to being competitive as well and supporting different businesses to make sure it's accessible.
That's very kind. Very kind. Anything from yourself on the kind of payment fees? Because there's a lot that we do in the background that I think it's not necessarily platforms don't quite understand, but more a case of the end consumer doesn't understand how much data goes into us optimizing payments for merchants and equally platforms.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I mean, I'm going to hammer home here about Apple Pay again.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, when I think about the collections journey, Apple Pay and wallet payments in general, in theory, is actually a cheaper collection method than cards. You don't have to go through 3DS. The biometrics is already kind of completed.
True.
So I mean, there's
Very
no
true.
3DS charges. So in theory, it's a cheaper collection method. And then I mean, if we look at open banking as well, I mean, there's specific ways. That we can configure the hosted checkout like we were discussing before, Martin, actually, that, for a large collection size, like let's just say £1,000, a collection agency, utilities, whatever it may be, they might not want a £1,000 payment on a card. They might want to only collect by open banking or pay by bank. So configuring the checkout in that way and kind of understanding, where their average transaction size really fits in, and potentially putting in stop limits so that it only displays a pay by bank option if it's above that limit. I think that there's.
I think it also, sorry to interrupt, it also goes slightly beyond that from my perspective, from a case of actually analysing the data. A lot of businesses just sit there and think that our acceptance rate is our acceptance rate, and that's it.
No.
They don't actually look at the decline data because 3-4% of their transactions might be declined due to SCA failed.
Yeah,
that's prime example of Apple Pay or a digital wallet.
Well, that's a good point. Like, I think actually, like AJ, you and I were talking about that on that side, because you guys can support where you're routing the different payment traffic through to optimize acceptance rates and everything else, right? It's not just about it's cheaper payment processing. Apple pays a higher rate because no 3D secure. It's actually even down to standard card payments, right? Where's the best route that's going to get the best acceptance rate? And you guys can optimize.
Yeah, there's honours, right? A Barclay card issued card will get a higher acceptance rate through Barclay Card's acquiring platform.
Exactly, and then I think if we narrow it down further onto the fees specifically for, if we look at, let's just say, a blended contract, right? Different pricing for different card products right across. I mean, it's worthwhile understanding first and foremost where the card traffic actually splits, or where the card traffic sits, sorry. So, I mean, if you've got a large portion of MasterCard debit, it's obviously going to be more beneficial if you can reduce that fee by 20 basis points than, another card product by 20 basis points. So, I think that there's, a lot that can be done in this sector, and I think it's really about educating and understanding that in a way I feel like it's been a little bit of a forgotten about sector by the payments companies or the legacy payment companies, that let's just say these collections agencies, utility companies, whatever they may be, they've got contracts from 10 years ago, and they've just kind of let it sit there, and it's a reputational thing, I think, as well. If we think about tier one acquirers, historically they might see it as slightly high risk, or they did see it as high risk 10 years ago, but it's become a more regulated sector.
Well, it's a really good point, right? That's where actually the legacy providers haven't really modernised their thoughts and approach towards the sector, because it's not the sector of 10 years ago. It hugely is about putting the customer at the heart of everything they're doing. Consumer duty, like you were saying earlier, George, has compounded that, as well as all the great things the FCA has done for the sector over the last several years. So it's night and day from 10 years ago, but you still see that legacy hangover in regards to, well, you're a debt collection agency, I don't want to be associated, but it should be seen as a positive. They're a force for good to understand the customer situation where their clients, for instance, might not be the ones that actually have the experience and the experts in that space of how to recover a customer that has fallen behind, right? And it really is about debt resolution. But the traditional payment services, for instance, don't see that and still see it as a area they don't want to be associated to. But I think it's a positive association.
But if I'm a big advocate for the industry, that I think it's a highly regulated industry now, that where the customer is at one of the most vulnerable moments in their life, really, and the customer is at the core of it. It's about protecting the customer and making a positive outcome for them. So I think that's where an educational standpoint for the tier ones really stands.
Well, whether it's from the lenders and creditors themselves, so the debt collection agencies, like you're saying, the vulnerable customer, that situation they're going through, they spend so much on training for their staff and everything else on how to support those customers, right? And if that doesn't show what the intent is behind that industry, I don't know what else could. It's not just the case of payment at the end of it, it's the right outcome, the right resolution.
Yep.
Fully aligned to consumer duty, but they were there well before, and I think that's compounded it. And payments, of course, can be one of the right outcomes for the customer, but that's the focus now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was a really good way to, not to end, but because we've got a closing question. But I'm going to go into the closing question. So every guest is getting asked this closing question, right?
Okay.
And the idea, we're going to collate everybody's answers together at the end and get a real nice video. So, in a world where everyone is looking for a competitive advantage, what piece of advice do you believe has the potential to set our listeners apart in their respective fields? Now, this doesn't have to be anything to do with roles, responsibilities, or anything. This could be a complete life thing. Is it a book? Is it a podcast? Not ours. Is it a book? Is it a podcast? Or some piece of advice that can set somebody apart?
Fear of action. Right, let's be honest, that is one of the biggest things that's probably slowed down everything in this industry. We said people that are stuck in their ways and everything else. There's huge opportunity for people that make action. And if I was to relate it back to myself, for instance, if I hadn't taken that leap on that day to go through and actually leave my corporate career, that I was safe, good career and everything else, path in front of me, wouldn't have been on the journey that I am today and having the opportunities to enjoy building something like DebtStream with the people and the team and the partners and everything I'm doing. So inaction is one of the biggest barriers to happiness, probably in every aspect.
I love that answer. And yourself?
I was trying to think of an answer while Martin was talking, but everything that he was saying was just resonating to me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I completely get your point, right? I think from my perspective, from a professional level, pushing the boundaries a little bit further, like moving to the UK, for example, from
it's a big step.
Little old New Zealand, actually in the middle of lockdown.
You took action.
In the middle of lockdown 2020, a little bit of a daunting step, but it's.
That's it. You did it. You didn't think about it, for instance, and not take action. You took that action, and now you're enjoying opportunity career, for instance, with an up-and-coming payments company that is going to take over the UK and Europe and everything
I like
else.
how you finished that.
Right, so...
And I get to sit on a podcast with the new Stephen Bartlett.
I won't go that far.
Yeah,
I won't go that far. Look, thank you very much for joining us. But just finally, where can people find you if they want to get hold of you with some questions?
If they want to go find us, you could go on LinkedIn and search for DebtStream, or just go to debtstream.co.uk. But speak to one of the team, whether it be Kunal Desai, Brett Ellis, myself, Martin O'Donnell. So if there's anything you want to find out about how we can support, just let us know.
And yourself?
Definitely. So find me on LinkedIn, AJ Davison, no D in the middle, DAVISON. Or just reach out to one of the team at Acquired. Go to the website, acquired.com.
Look, I really appreciate both of your time. Thank you very much.
No, thanks for having me back on. It's been great.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Martin.